Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins.
Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we are going to talk about what to do when you receive upsetting or troubling news, and also, importantly, who to trust, who to confide in or talk to, and if you are the friend or family or person that is the supportive person, how you can best support the person who has gotten the difficult news. So the first thing that happens when we hear or receive news that is not what we wanted to hear, and of course that could be in a variety of different kinds of contexts, everything from health to family to relationships to medical things to job, career, all kinds of areas of life where we might receive information or news that we find upsetting. The first thing that happens is amygdala activation, where your brain is beginning to immediately process threatening information. And that is your brain's alarm system, your emotional center, that triggers kind of this immediate fight or flight freeze response. And that begins to happen before your conscious mind even has the chance to fully process what you have heard. What this means is that your logic kind of shuts off, stress hormone release, cortisol and adrenaline release, and those can remain elevated for hours and even days, depending on the level and type of information that you're receiving, and it creates an ongoing persistent feeling of being on edge or anxious. There's also a notable disruption with the prefrontal cortex, which is where we have our rational thinking, our planning, our ability to logic things out and to think clearly and to make good strategic decisions. All of that becomes less active. And this is partially why receiving difficult or upsetting news can make you feel like you can't think straight. You can't seem to focus. Even as you try to maybe go on about your day and get into doing other things or the normal things that you would do, you feel distracted and unfocused. You may notice yourself driving somewhere without really paying attention, or if you're doing tasks, physical tasks, you may find yourself doing them wrong or clumsily or in a very distracted way. And that is because literally your thinking brain is compromised. Your brain's default mode network, which has to do with self-reflection and planning, can also become stuck in rumination loops related to the negative information. We've probably all had that experience where we just can't stop thinking about the thing. It's constantly on our mind. And in some cases, it can even feel as though every new thing that's introduced to us, whether it's a song or a TV show or a conversation, it all seems to somehow tie back to that thing that we're worried about, that thing that we're thinking about that we can't stop thinking about. Physically, there may be some bodily sensations of racing heart or even heart palpitations. There may be very shallow, rapid breathing. There may be a lot of muscle tension, especially in the shoulders and jaw. There can be digestive disruption, where you feel nauseous, you can't eat. There may be sleep disturbances. There may be ongoing difficulty with concentrating and distraction. And all of these things, all of these reactions are totally and completely normal and definitely don't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's a very human response. And your body and brain are doing exactly what they are wired to do, which is essentially to reduce your cognitive load so that you could focus on fight or flight as needed. Unfortunately, in some cases in our modern society, being able to do those things is not necessarily helpful when the problem at hand does not require those skills. But this is our nervous system's way of appropriately prioritizing emotional processing over other things, ordinary tasks. And traditional advice, like just focusing on your breathing or think positive thoughts, is incredibly unhelpful in an acute crisis state. Your thinking brain just isn't available for complex instructions. So what should we do or what can we do? And there are different phases of receiving this upsetting news. There's the acute phase where it's immediately after it's happened. And then, of course, as some time passes, there are changes to that phase. So the first half an hour or so after receiving the news, your body is flooded with those stress hormones, needs to be processed, and sometimes the most effective intervention can actually be movement. And this is often why we'll see people pacing when they're nervous or worried or anxious or upset. They're actually burning off some of that desire to fight or flight, to move. So doing some physical movement that engages large muscle groups can help to begin to metabolize some of those stress chemicals. There are other things like cold interventions, splashing cold water on your face, holding ice cubes, putting ice cubes on your hands or wrists, stepping outside into cooler air, doing activities that stimulate both sides of your brain, like walking, drumming on your thighs with alternating hands, crossing your arms, or tapping your shoulders. Obviously, we know about tools like EFT tapping as well, which can be incredibly helpful for deactivating the nervous system and taking things down a notch. The next phase would be the next 24 hours afterwards. And this is where we can slowly begin to incorporate things like gentle distractions. So initially it may not work very well because there is so much excess energy and adrenaline pumping through. But after a little bit of time has passed, we can shift into things like watching familiar, comfortable, comforting shows or comforting book. Not something that's really new and exciting or particularly that requires a lot of mental energy or mental focus. Doing things that feel familiar and safe and comforting, or simple tasks like organizing a drawer, making a cup of tea. Things that are slightly physical like cleaning can actually be very therapeutic when you're upset or worried, and focusing on basic physical care. Sometimes it's just literally getting through the day. Showering or bathing, finding comfortable clothes, taking care of nutrition, making sure you're eating something even if you don't feel super hungry. And you can find some really basic foods if you are experiencing nausea and digestive distress because of being worried and upset. There are foods that are better for those situations. And once your prefrontal cortex slowly starts to come back online, when you have a little bit more focus and attention, then you can work on things like breathing exercises, planning, solving, trying to figure out which steps to take, what needs to happen next, and perhaps having deeper conversations around what to do. The key is not overwhelming yourself in those early stages because you literally don't have the focus or the prefrontal cortex capacity to solve problems in that moment. The next piece that I think is really, really important that I would guess most of us have also had negative experiences with is who to tell, who to talk to, who to lean on for support, if that is necessary, if you find that that would be helpful. There are many ways in which getting appropriate and positive support can be extremely beneficial, where we experience the release of oxytocin when we feel heard, when we have been appropriately supported by someone who's caring. However, sharing difficult news with the wrong person can actually re-traumatize your nervous system. When someone else responds poorly to your vulnerability, your brain actually processes that as a social threat, and that can actually make your stress response even worse than it already was. So in contrast, when you share with someone who's emotionally attuned and supportive, their calm nervous system can literally help to regulate yours through mirror neurons and shared physiology. You have oxytocin release from the genuine empathy coming from them, and that can support oxytocin production, which directly counters some of that cortisol, that stress hormone that's been released into your nervous system, and help you get a little bit closer back to your baseline. That's why for some people, talking makes them feel better, but it really does matter who you're talking to and what their response is. That supportive listener helps to engage you, create that oxytocin. They might even help to engage your rational thinking and kind of help you calm down where you can start to think more clearly, moving you out of pure amygdala reactivity. And there's also kind of this idea of a shared load where we feel truly supported and heard and cared for. And that can help our brain stress centers to slowly reduce the activation. However, on the flip side, if they respond with judgment, with dismissal, or with their own anxiety, your brain takes that as the social threat, it amplifies your stress response, reactivates the amygdala, re-triggers your fight or flight response, sometimes even more intensely than when you receive the original news. You might even feel worse. There's the emotional contagion. If they're really upset too, you might kind of have that mirror neuron where you're catching the other person's emotional state. If they're anxious and overwhelmed, your nervous system is trying to also absorb their distress. And then there's a sense of betrayal trauma, where your brain now has to process both the original bad news and the social rejection. So people that are not good supports to share with would be, number one, somebody who is a minimizer, the people that would say, oh, it could be worse, or everything happens for a reason, or just try to be positive. That response actually shuts down your brain's natural processing mechanisms. Not helpful. The number two would be the gossiper, someone who might spread your personal information, and that creates additional distress now. Number three is the one-upper, so somebody who responds with their own worst story or how they had it worse than you and essentially hijacks your emotional processing time. Next would be a problem solver, and usually this is done with really good intentions, but it's ultimately unhelpful. Someone who immediately jumps to solutions without acknowledging your emotional experience, and that can leave you feeling unheard or even invalidated. And then finally, the anxious person who ultimately becomes more distressed even than you are and dysregulates your nervous system even further. The best case scenario is someone who can stay calm and present while you're in your emotional distress, and they can handle that. They can hold space for what you're feeling without trying to change, without trying to fix how you're feeling, without minimizing how you're feeling or invalidating it. They are worthy of your confidentiality. They will keep your personal information private. They have the emotional bandwidth to hold space for that difficult news without bringing in their own problems into that moment. And they are non-judgmental. And so in choosing this person, it helps to just start with one trusted person first. It is not suggested that you broadcast to multiple people. I would not recommend posting directly on social media before you've even had the opportunity to emotionally process what you've been told or whatever it is that's going on. Give yourself a moment to gauge your own internal reaction. And importantly, protect your emotional emotional state before inviting in anybody else into what you're experiencing. The timing matters too, so it's often advisable to wait 24 to 48 hours before involving other people where possible. Now, of course, that may not pertain to your immediate family or partner. Of course, those situations are up to each individual situation, but in terms of sharing it more publicly or with larger groups, it might be a good idea to wait. Set your boundaries. At the beginning of the conversation, let the other party know that you're sharing it because you're looking for support and how you would like to be supported and that you're not looking for advice. That can be actually really helpful because a lot of very well-meaning people want to be supportive. They want to do right by you, but they don't necessarily know how or what to say in that moment. And so even if you're feeling scattered, if you can give them just a little nugget of what you need, it can be extremely helpful. Also, trust your gut. Your nervous system often knows before your conscious mind knows whether or not a person feels safe to confide in, and definitely pay attention to those internal signals that you're receiving. And it can be helpful to know ahead of time, just in your life, 2 or 3 people that you might call if you needed someone to talk to. You can also rely on mental health professionals and various other forms of professional support. That would obviously be someone who's well trained in managing these types of difficult situations. And then on the flip side, when you are the person who is the friend that has been called, or the family member or the partner, and someone else is sharing their difficult news with you, you can have a big impact on how supported they end up feeling in that moment in some very simple and small choices that you make. So noticing first your own emotional state, ensuring that you truly have the capacity to support them in that moment, and being honest with yourself and with them if you don't, because your emotional state will impact their mirror neuron activation. And if you come in with a calm, regulated nervous system, it can actually help to co-regulate their distressed state. And when you come in with genuine empathy, it can help them to feel more of that oxytocin supported release. And that can counter some of their stress hormones. You can also have your thoughtful responses versus just kind of saying like stuff you've heard that's really cliche. Just actually listening and maybe just trying to reflect back to them what you're hearing, as opposed to rushing in with problem solving, with advice, with a story about someone else who had the same problem, with your own story in particular. If something that you've been through, sometimes that can feel like you are taking away from what they're struggling with, that's very pervasive in that moment and more prominent than whatever you experienced, in the past. Your body language, your tone of your voice, and your emotional responses will send signals to them about whether you are a safe party or a threatening party in terms of their vulnerable state. So little things you can do are like put away devices, like don't be on your phone in the background while they're talking. Give that person your full attention. Keep your body language open and calm. Try to match their energy level. Don't be overly cheerful. If they're sad or upset or crying or tearful, it's not the time to try to be Miss Positivity or Mr. Positivity. They are struggling with something and they're not necessarily in a place where they want to be coaxed out of it. Making sure your own breathing is slow and deep, because they may unconsciously mirror your breathing patterns and your posture. And just saying comforting things that show that you're listening and that show that you care, and that validate their experience. Things like, that sounds difficult. I can definitely see why you'd be feeling so overwhelmed. And your reaction makes complete sense. And also things like, thank you for trusting me with this. Don't say things like, it could be worse, everything happens for a reason, you need to stay positive, you need to do X, Y, and Z, insert advice. Or anything minimizing like, well, at least blah, blah, blah. If you're not sure what to say, you can always ask, what would feel the most supportive to hear right now? Or what would you like for me to do next? Do you want me to listen, or are you looking for advice? How can I best support you? What do you need the most from me right now? And even if you don't feel like you have the perfect thing to say, it's a lot just that you're willing to sit there and hold space with them. And mostly that you're not judging them. That's probably the most important thing, that you're just showing care and concern, not rushing them towards solutions, just allowing for them to be in the moment that they're in, no matter how difficult that is for them. Not trying to force them to feel happier or more cheerful, just allowing it to be, and knowing that they can get through it more easily if they allow themselves the processing time. The final note on this has to do with longer-term relationships after something difficult has been shared. One of the things that can be particularly challenging is that when we have told someone something that is hard, whether it's medical or personal or relationship, or even something that happened like many years ago, that we've opened up and become vulnerable in sharing that information with someone else, we have given that person some power. And what that power is the power to bring it back up when we may not want to. And what's hard about that is that you may have been having an okay day where maybe for the first time you actually weren't thinking about that. And now they've kind of reintroduced it, and now you're struggling and trying to like not burst into tears again. And that is the challenging thing about sharing something vulnerable with someone else, meaning that they feel like they can bring that up and ask you about it at any time. In general, it's helpful if you're the supporter, the friend or whomever, that you don't assume that it's okay to bring up that vulnerable share at any old time. Sometimes a really well-intentioned person will think, if I don't ask about this, they'll think I don't care. And your need to show that you care might actually be overriding their need to control their own healing process or their own agency in choosing when they're going to revisit that subject. Sometimes the most supportive thing is actually non-action, but being available if they come to you. They may find that they're constantly braced for that topic to come back up, and it may make conversation difficult, especially if you do bring it up a few times and they don't want to discuss it and you continue to bring it up. You're going to create a situation where they don't want to talk to you. Forced reminders interrupt the natural healing cycle. The brain has its own process for moving through trauma and processing it over time, where the individual will take that thing out of the box and look at it and deal with it and then put it back away again. And that person has to decide how and when they are going to address that. There are organic healing cycles that the brain moves into and out of. And the brain also needs time to integrate and consolidate information and emotion. Constant reminders, like that constant friction, can help to prevent that from actually happening naturally, that integration. It's helpful for people to have little periods of time where they're not thinking about the problem, allowing them to rebuild their emotional resilience and to remember their capability of feeling good again, which they may struggle with for a period of time, and they might move in and out of feeling good and bad. So in general, it's very helpful to remember that when we have an emotional response, and particularly in those early moments when the brain feels like it's shutting down, you can't think straight, you're distracted, you can't seem to focus, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. It is a perfectly normal response to an upsetting situation or upsetting news, and you can choose your next steps for self-care and for support as wisely as possible. So we talked about movement being helpful immediately after. We talked about in the coming hours and days, choosing things that feel familiar and comfortable. Favorite books, favorite movies, favorite blanket, stuffed animal, whatever. And then importantly, choosing wisely whom you choose to lean on and use as a support system. It sometimes is actually better not to lean on someone at all if that person is going to take advantage of your vulnerability or cause you to have even further distress. It may not be worth using that person as a support. And when you are the person offering support, do your best to follow their lead rather than your own urge to try to help them. Allow them to control their own healing timeline and to tell you what it is they need the most. We can become a safe and steady presence while that person's brain does the hard work of processing whatever it is that they're dealing with. So I know this was a little bit more serious of a topic than some that we've covered, but I do hope that you have found it to be very useful and helpful. And while it is always good to get support from others, there are moments when having our own mindset tools can be hugely powerful, and having something available around the clock, sometimes in the middle of the night if we need it, can be beneficial, which is why I offer a mindset membership of tools that includes things like hypnosis, yoga nidra, meditation, visualization, and EFT tapping videos. All of these tools combined are very profound in allowing us to better regulate our own nervous system, to manage our own thinking patterns and some of these emotional responses, and to empower us to have tools in our hands that we can use when we need them in case we don't feel supported, or just in case we need an extra layer of support. And all of that information is available in the show notes. And until the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.